Hello and welcome to the webinar on a certified organic winter nursery for corn breeding. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and our many upcoming and recorded webinars on organic farming and research topics on our website at extension.org/organic_production. A PDF handout of the slides for this webinar is also available. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a quick rundown on how today's webinar will work. We will be running a very quick poll question to find out who's on the webinar today, and that will be followed by about a 30-minute presentation. After that, we'll have an additional 30 minutes for your questions. We'll be reading the questions out loud after the presentation is over, and we'll answer as many as we have time for. So today we're very excited to be hosting a team of researchers from a NIFA OREI-funded project on corn breeding. Brian Brenner, Paul Scott, and Kevin Montgomery. Brian Brenner, pictured on top, is a professor at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. He carries out research and communicates information about organic agriculture in tropical farming systems. Kevin Montgomery, with the pineapple in the center there, is a consultant in central Illinois. His expertise spans corn breeding with emphasis on yield-limiting factors such as plant diseases and insects. Paul Scott, pictured on the bottom in the cornfield, is a research geneticist with the USDA ARS in Ames, Iowa, where he's worked for the past 18 years. His work focuses on improving corn for niche markets such as organic corn. This group would like to get an idea of who is on the webinar today, so I'm going to just run a very quick poll question, which is going to pop up on the screen. And this will ask you if you are a farmer, a breeder, a scientist, or something else. So if you could just vote, just click on the screen. I'll leave this up for another maybe 15 seconds or so, and then we'll close that and share the results. Okay, that sounds good. And I'll just share that. So we have about 18% farmers, 27% breeders, 9% scientists, and 45% other. So thank you for doing that. I'll just hide the results there. And now I'm going to hand things over to Paul. So Paul, you have the screen controlled now, but if you have any trouble, just let me know and I'll give it back to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Alice, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be participating in this eOrganic webinar. I just want to start off by introducing the larger group that you mentioned that we're participating in with the OREI NIFA-funded grant. We are a group of corn breeders, and the name of our grant is Strengthening Public Corn Breeding to ensure that organic cultivars or organic farmers have access to elite cultivars. And that's kind of a long, complicated name, but really what the objective of this grant proposal is to create some infrastructure to support public corn breeding. And that's important because we think public corn breeding is a good source of seeds for organic farmers to plant. Let's see, I just want to show the geographical distribution of the members of our project, and I'll list their names later, but we're geographically diverse, so we span from Ithaca, New York, through the Corn Belt in Decatur, Illinois, and Ames, Iowa. Lake Geneva, Wisconsin is kind of in the northern part of the Corn Belt, all the way out west to Las Cruces, New Mexico. So we're geographically diverse, and yet for the past 4 years we've been cooperating together to do this organically certified winter nursery, and that nursery is located in Lajas, Puerto Rico. And we've learned quite a bit by doing this winter nursery, and our goal today is to try to convey some of the things that we've learned. So with that, I think we'll start our panel discussion. And I just wanted to start with a quick discussion of what a nursery is. And so, Kevin, could you maybe spend just a few minutes defining what a winter nursery is for the listeners?
Yes, thank you, Paul. The reason for conducting winter nursery activities is it allows us to get another generation of activity in the same calendar year. So if we need to increase seed or we need to do recombinations or anything that requires planting and pollinating, a winter nursery is an opportunity to catch up on activities or to get an additional season in during the year. And so we use this for several different kinds of things. Oftentimes we're using it to make new hybrid combinations based on the data that we have from the fall. Winter nurseries are located somewhere that crops can grow during our winter. And for us, Puerto Rico was the only opportunity for us to do a certified organic winter nursery. None of the other locations that we queried were capable of providing us with a certified organic site where we could continue our research.
Okay, that sounds good, Kevin. Do you want to spend a few minutes talking about the importance of you've hit on this already, but the importance of this activity in a corn breeding program?
Sure. As corn breeders, we have a yardstick that we measure genetic gain. It's called the genetic gain equation. And the importance of the genetic gain equation is we can predict how quickly we can make progress for a trait. And to make progress, we need to be able to complete a generation, going from seed to seed in a growing season. And the more growing seasons we can accomplish for a given project, the more opportunities there are for making progress. So, for instance, if we want to develop a new corn hybrid from scratch, it takes a minimum of 7 or 8 generations, and potentially more than that. So every time we use a winter nursery, or anytime we use off-season nurseries to either generate hybrids or to test hybrids or to do some activity that gets us closer to a commercial product, it allows us to make more progress towards that goal. The thing about a hybrid crop like corn is that there are 2 parallel phases. One is the development of the inbred parents, and the second is the testing of the hybrids. And in the northern climates, or in the temperate locations where we're located in the U.S., we can do both of those things in the same environments in the summer, inbred development and hybrid testing. But in the winter represents an environment that is not a target for crop production, so typically the activities in a winter nursery would be for making new hybrids, advancing generations, but not testing the hybrids, because the performance in those environments is not relevant in general for the traits of interest. The important thing is that a winter nursery cuts the time of development in half as a result of being able to go 2 or 3 generations in a year. Paul?
You're kind of, yes. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You kind of faded out there at the end, but I think we caught the gist of what you were saying. The key message is that it cuts the time it takes to develop hybrids in half, right?
Yes.
So I know we have a diverse audience today, and we're not going to spend a lot more time talking about corn breeding, but hopefully everybody's up to a level of speed they need to be to understand the importance of the winter nursery. And we do plan to have some additional webinars where we go into more detail about our corn breeding program in some future webinars. But for now, I think what we'll do is transition over from the corn breeding part of it to the actual management and kind of best practices that we use in carrying out our winter nursery. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give you a little overview of the environment at the site where we're doing the winter nursery. The winter nursery is a 9.4 acre certified organic farm located at the University of Puerto Rico Agricultural Experiment Station in Lajas. It's on the southwestern corner of the island. Just to give you a little idea of where Puerto Rico is, and in case you don't know, it's one of the islands in the Antilles, which the Antilles are stretched from Cuba all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago. Puerto Rico is a small island, only 35 miles wide by 100 miles long. It's located at, the slides are changing. It's located at 18 degrees north latitude, which puts it right in the tropics. There are no other tropical locations on mainland, in the mainland United States, only in Hawaii. So that's one advantage of Puerto Rico. It's also a U.S. possession, which uses the U.S. currency and U.S. passport, so it makes it easy to travel back and forth for the breeders. We have a 9.4 acre certified organic farm, which was certified in 2010, but we've been practicing organic management since 2006. So let me talk a little bit about the growing conditions. In Puerto Rico, we have a dry season in the wintertime from about December through March. So you can see on the bar graph at the bottom of that graph that January, February, March, and then December have about 2 inches average rainfall per month. So that keeps things pretty dry. That's basically when we have our winter nursery. There's a small spike in rain in April, May, and June, and that's basically when we're harvesting, but it doesn't really affect the harvest at all. And then we have a larger spike from July through November, which is when we get the bulk of our rain. And we have heavy soils. It's a heavy clay vertisol called fraternidad clay. It has high water retention. So if we get a lot of rain, like in October and November, it stays wet for a long time. And it makes it hard for us to get in when the breeders want to plant, which is around the end of November. So that's always sort of a struggle for us to get planted in time for the breeders to get their seed back in time. So we have the day length doesn't vary much in the tropics. We have about an 11-hour day length in around December 21st and the winter solstice, and it's only 13 hours on June 21st in the summer solstice. So we only have 2 hours of difference in day length, which of course would be a lot different from the day length up north in the summertime. The temperatures, we have the red line is the mean high temperature for the year, and you can see it doesn't vary much from January through July to December. It's pretty much the same. There's only about a 5-degree difference from winter to summer. And the nighttime temperature, the blue line, which is the average low, is there's about an 8-degree difference from winter to summer. So it gets a little cooler at night, but during the wintertime, but not too much cooler during the day. So the average high temperature during the winter nursery from like November through May varies between 87 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the average low is between 62 and 70. And then the humidity in the tropics is very high, at least in the wet tropics. So we have a humidity of approximately 60 to 80% most of the time. So that also affects the drying of the corn and other maybe diseases and things. So we'll talk about that a little later. So that's basically it for that. And then, so I guess I'll continue, right, Paul?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so so what are some of the challenges? Well, no winter kill of insects and diseases, which For tropically adapted corn varieties, which we do have here in Puerto Rico, it's not such an issue because they have natural resistance to insects and diseases. But when we're planting northern genotypes, which are not adapted to our conditions, our day length, our temperatures, our diseases and insects, we can have problems with disease and insects. Like in this picture, you see fall armyworm damage in the shoots. So the fall armyworms eat into the shoots, and if they kill the meristem, then we don't have flowering, and we don't harvest anything. We can't do pollination. So the fall armyworm was really our worst pest, but we were pretty much able to control it with approximately weekly sprayings of BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, which we use DPEL, and then we mix it with either Trilogy, which is a neem oil, or Pyganic, which is pyrethrum. So what we do is we rotate BT plus Pyganic or BT plus neem oil, and it seems to work pretty well. And the Trilogy, being neem oil, is also a fungicide, so we don't really have too many problems with anything else other than fall armyworm. So another challenge here are holidays and strikes, because the breeders want to plant, like I mentioned, around the end of November. But here we have, after Thanksgiving, pretty much the Christmas holidays start around Thanksgiving, and they go on until Three Kings Day on January 6th. So especially the week before Christmas, the week of Christmas, and the first 2 weeks of January, the university basically closes. So it's always hard to get things planted. We have to work around the rain, work around the holidays. And if we do get things planted, it's always a sort of a challenge to get things cultivated on time, get things irrigated on time. But we work it out. But they are challenges. One time we had a strike right during the peak of the harvest and shelling season, and on the 7th and 8th of June in 2012. So there was a strike. They closed the station, so we had to go in a back gate and get one of my assistant's sons to help us. But we worked through that and got the shelling done and got the grades shipped out. So, but those are some issues we've had to deal with. Weather, well, I've already talked about the rain. The timing of the rains in November seems to always conflict with when the breeders want to plant. So that's sort of a challenge. One year we even had a crisis where we planted when it was too wet, and we didn't have good germination at all. So I'll talk about that down below in emergence and stand establishment. Weed control, I consider weed control the number one management issue for organic winter nursery, or really organic planting period, because I feel like we can control insects and diseases pretty well. So, and weeds we can control too, but it just takes a lot of work. Basically what we've been doing is approximately 2 mechanical cultivations with the tractor, followed by about 2 hand hoeings when the plants get too high to cultivate with the tractor. And then sometimes, if the field is a little weedy before harvest, we go through with a string trimmer and just get the weeds down so it's a little easier to walk through the field. So emergence and stand establishment, that goes, the problem with emergence, it goes hand in hand with the rain in November. When we're always under pressure to plant in a early so that we can harvest early, and the breeders can have their materials back to plant when they need to plant in the spring. So we're sort of always pushed to work the soil a little wetter than I'd like to do. And since it's a heavy clay soil, we can have problems. And what in the 2012-2013 nursery, we had a disaster because we thought the ground was dry enough, and we worked it. We had what looked like a nice seed bed, but we planted, and then we made a second mistake. We planted and the soil was too wet. And then we also overhead irrigated on top of that. And we had horrible germination. It was half of the field didn't germinate at all. The rest was 30 to 40% germination. So it wasn't a good Christmas for me. I went through a lot of stress that year, but we ended up making a replacement nursery a little later. And actually the yields were actually pretty much similar to the other years. So we sort of made up for that. And also I've heard that other non-organic winter nurseries have these failures too. So that makes me feel a little better. And what we did in the last winter nursery after we had this problem is that we planted a priority nursery and a regular nursery. So the priority we planted a little earlier, like in late November, early December. Just in case we had a problem, we planned to have a larger, later nursery, which we planted in last winter season. They both turned out good, and we had good harvest from both nurseries. But that was sort of we did that as an insurance measure. So basically, we've had challenges, but I feel like we've been able to overcome the challenges.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that we keep learning and changing our protocol as we learn more about it. But I feel like we're now doing pretty well. Let's see. I think some of the next slides are going to be a little repetition of what you've already said. Do you want to mention?
Yeah, let me just talk a little bit about the soil and the fertility management system, and then on the next slide we'll have some pictures of the cover crops.
Okay.
The pH of our soil is about 6. The organic matter is about 2%, which is pretty good for the tropics. We have low phosphorus but high potassium, magnesium, and calcium, so that the soil is pretty good. What we do is we rotate the corn crop. After we harvest in May or June, we'll plow up the field and we'll plant mucuna or crotalaria as a cover crop. And then around October or early November, there at the bottom of the slide on the left side is crotalaria huncea, which is sun hemp, which is what we use sometimes. And on the right side on the bottom is mucuna pruriens, or in English it is velvet bean. So we plant those in between the corn crops and then turn them under, and we assume we're getting about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre from the cover crop, and then we add an additional 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen with a commercial organic fertilizer called Bioflora 665. So we're adding about 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, but of course in an organic system it's not all available to the crop. So we're getting approximately half of that, or maybe 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre for the crop, and it seems to that seems to be sufficient. We seem to have we don't see any nutrient deficiencies, so I think we're doing pretty well with the fertilization. So I'll just go on with this slide. Okay, I already talked about the rotation. We use the crotalaria and the mucuna. Trap crops, we really don't use trap crops, but we do have crotalaria borders. This high plant on the bottom left side of the screen, which has yellow flowers. It attracts a lot of pollinators. It attracts it has nectar, so it provides nectar and habitat for natural predators. So we plant that as a border. So it's not really a trap crop, but it's a crop that we plant to attract predators. So the sprays that we use, I already mentioned. We use BT, Trilogy, and Pyganic, partially because we don't have much available here in Puerto Rico. Since the market is small here, a lot of the manufacturers of organic pest control products don't want to register them here. So we don't have access to like garlic barrier and surround and a lot of other products that are probably easily available up in the mainland. So basically we use these 3 products and it seems to work well for us.
And those products are okay for certified organic, right?
Right, they're all OMRI certified, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let me just mention the boom sprayer up in the
Oh,
on
okay.
the last slide. Yeah, I didn't really mention that, but when the plants are small, we use a boom sprayer and just go right over the top of the plants, which is good because it goes down into the whorl where the fall armyworms are hiding. So we get pretty good control that way. When the plants get too tall for the boom sprayer, we have a pistol sprayer. So somebody goes riding on the tractor with the driver, and with a sprayer that has a range of about 40 or 50 feet, they try to evenly cover the plants. But by that time, once they flower, we really don't have to spray too much. Since the breeders are covering the ears, we don't really have too much of a problem of armyworms getting in under the ears. So once the plants flower, we can cut down on the spraying.
So Brian, how many passes would you say you typically make in one nursery then?
Well, we try to spray once a week, but it doesn't always work out because of rain. You know, if the field gets too wet, we can't go in with a tractor. So I would say we probably spray about between one and two times a week until tasseling, and then we pretty much stop spraying. We may spray twice after that, but we don't spray with the same intensity. What we want to do is control the fall armyworm until the plant flowers. Then we're okay. I don't know if Kevin wants to add anything to that about the pest control.
Well, in addition to the pest control, some of the breeders are also opportunists, and they utilize an unsprayed section of the nursery to develop native resistance to fall armyworm and corn earworm. So that's the other genetic component of this organic system, is that we're trying to develop things that are resistant to fall armyworm and corn earworm that survive even when they have not been sprayed.
And I would say that they're pretty successful too. There are some materials in that section that are very, that look very good.
Yes, there are.
Okay, so I guess I'll go on with irrigation. We've tried drip irrigation, like you see in the upper right-hand picture, and we've tried overhead irrigation, like you see in the lower left. Each have their benefits and disadvantages. So basically, we've concluded that drip overall works better than overhead. It's more even. The problem with overhead is it's a round pattern in a square field. So some areas get more water than others, and it's just not that even. The drip puts the water evenly right where it needs to be, right at the plant roots. There is a less problem with weed growth between the rows. One thing I don't like about drip tape is the plastic waste. I really don't like to use it that much, but it has other benefits, so I sacrifice there. It also interferes with the weed control management, like the cultivators can get caught in the T-tape, or when people are hoeing, they can cut it. So it's sort of it's easier. Overhead is just easier, but drip works better. So that you changed the slide on me, but basically, okay. So problems with overhead are okay. We've also had some pump problems. Pumps breaking down, then the drip doesn't work. The overhead irrigation also has pump problems. The traveler can have problems. We've had some bacterial shoot rot too, and Kevin says that he's seen that in the north too with overhead irrigation. There's some Erwinia or some kind of bacterial rot in the shoots, but it isn't that serious. And then we also have a problem also during the Christmas holidays, because the canal to get the water for the overhead irrigation has to be opened, and if people are on vacation, it's hard to get that done. So each method has its pros and cons, but we've decided the drip is best. Okay,
so I wanted to show Brian on this lower left picture here. You can see the drip tape running while the tractor is cultivating the field. So, I mean, I can imagine that it takes a pretty steady hand on the wheel to not get into the irrigation.
Right, and when the plants are small, the wind can, it gets pretty windy in Lajas in the wintertime, and the wind can blow the T-tape into the middle of the row, so we always have to go and manually put it where it's supposed to be, and it's just sort of a hassle. You know, it's just the overhead is just much easier. So okay, so let me talk a little bit about weed control, which I already said was, to me, the hardest thing to deal with in an organic winter nursery. The upper right picture shows our first year, and I had never worked with field crops. I had always worked with vegetables and fruits, so this was my first experience with corn, and you can see that we didn't do our weed control was not very good the first year. We had a lot of problems with vines, and we realized that we really needed to keep the weeds under control from the very beginning. So as you see in the lower two pictures, we were able to cultivate and keep between cultivating and hoeing, we pretty much kept the weeds under control. At the same time, that first year, our yields weren't bad, because the average yield per breeder for all 4 years of this project was 133 pounds of seed, and that was the exact same yield that we had the first year, 133 pounds per breeder. So, and the average total for each winter nursery was 594 pounds of seed, and that first year, the weedy year, we actually had 664 pounds of seed harvested. So it was actually not a bad year, despite all the weeds. It just made harvest difficult. So, okay, so I guess that's it for weed control, Paul. So you could change the slide, unless you have a comment.
No, I think you covered it very well. Kevin, do you want to add anything? I should say we're about at our half-hour point, so we need to wrap up and take questions pretty soon. But
I think we're almost over.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just wanted to say a few words about harvesting, because it was really interesting to me. I'm kind of into seed quality, so the ability of a seed to germinate. And the weather conditions in Puerto Rico presented a real interesting problem for drying the seeds that we harvested, because typically, we never wanted to dry seed and preserve the germination. It's really important to not have a high temperature, so we try to stay under 105 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 40 degrees Celsius. And then it was very humid, so drying was a problem. And it turned out that it was so hot in Puerto Rico that we couldn't use heat at all, because it was already, close to that 105 degree temperature sometime in the room where we were drying. And so really we wound up using forced air without heat, and that gave us good seed quality at the end of the day. And then the other thing that I found pretty interesting were our phytosanitary controls. Brian, do you want to just talk about the freezing process that you use?
Right. Yeah, it's very simple, but we get the seed USDA inspected before we ship it back to the mainland. So we don't want to have any weevils or any other insects in the seed. So what we do is we try to get the seed moisture levels as low as we can, which is about 13 or 14%. It's hard to get them any lower than that without using heat. And the first year we used 100 degree heat, but after that we just used forced air. So, but we were able to get them down to 13% approximately. And then what we do is we just freeze them in an ordinary freezer over either 24 hours or 48 hours, just to kill any adult insects. And then we get the seed inspected and ship it. And so it was the first year we were a little concerned with freezing seed at that moisture level. We wanted to get it down a little lower than 13%. But I think the breeders were happy with the germination and the seed quality. So I think it's worked well.
Yeah, it's interesting because against all the what you hear about, that you should not freeze seed, but the key is that you can freeze it as long as the moisture content is low enough. I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's see, there's this picture up here in the upper left. These are things that we don't have in Iowa. Are they some kind of a post-harvest issue?
No,
or
not
other?
not that creature, but we do have the rats, the rodents, which you do have in Iowa too, and that those can be an issue, especially in a weedy field. But since the bags were covered, we mostly didn't have too many rat problems, except for some of the very small inbred materials that were very close to the ground. And if we didn't harvest them in a timely way, then we could have some rat damage.
And grain sitting out was always a problem, as I recall, too, because a lot of the work was done in open structures.
Right. Well, we always had to put it away at night. And if you in the lower right hand picture, that's one of the dryers we used, and we basically have it's all enclosed with wire mesh. So whenever we close it at the end of the day, and no rats can get in there. But if you left anything open, the rats could get in there and eat some of the grain. It's not like a major problem, but it's just something that we have to be aware of.
And something we don't worry too much about. Okay, I guess I just wanted to summarize by wrapping up and commenting on things that we thought were surprises. So, Kevin, you already mentioned the unsprayed native insect resistance experiment. Do you want to comment on any other surprises? You have a lot of experience in corn breeding, and I think you're in a good position to comment about what was different in our organic nursery that surprised you.
Well, I'd say that probably the primary thing is that anytime you take materials from the temperate regions and go to the tropics, there's always a concern about day length sensitivity, whether material will behave the way you would predict it would for flowering. And I think every breeder has experienced some of those kinds of things. There's one or two lines in every nursery that doesn't behave the way we would predict. It interferes with our ability to get crosses made. It hasn't been major, and it hasn't been very predictable in the sense that the lines that don't behave well, they're repeatable from one winter nursery to the next, but as you're developing new lines, it may not have anything to do with its genetic background. So we always have to be aware of those kinds of things. The fall armyworm and corn earworm resistance has been very useful for those of us that have practiced selection and developed lines with resistance to that. We haven't spent much time talking about diseases, but virtually every disease that's present in the Corn Belt is also present in Puerto Rico in the tropics. And so for those breeders that pay attention to what's going on in the field, it is possible to identify materials that have good resistance to specific diseases or to diseases in general. Excuse me. And that can translate into disease resistance when material is brought back home.
Yeah, so that's a kind of added benefit to our nursery.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that is all the content we have.
Unmuted.
Unless anybody wants to make a last-minute comment, what I'll do is wrap it up, and we'll start to take questions. Do either of you have anything else you want to say?
No, I don't have anything, Paul, but I just thank everybody for listening to us.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, I just want to mention the full list of cooperators that are on our grant. So we're a subset of the full group, and And then I also want to particularly thank the University of Puerto Rico staff because they put in so much of the work that Brian talked about. Here are some of them on our winter nursery. And then, as we mentioned earlier, we're funded by the National Institutes of Food and Agriculture. And these are our institutions. And I think with that, we're ready to take questions from the audience, Alice.
Okay, that sounds great. We're about to begin our question and answer session. So for anybody who missed the very beginning of this webinar, you can use the question box on your screen to type in a question and hit return. And if you don't see the question box, just click the small plus sign, or actually now it's a little triangle next to the word question to open it up. I also want to mention that we really value your feedback, so if you could fill out the follow-up survey, which you'll be receiving in an email later today, we'd really appreciate that. And also, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording if you want to view anything again or share it with others on our website. So I just put the link to that on our screen. If you have a general question about organic farming, not necessarily about corn breeding, you can use the e-extension Ask an Expert service. And if you want to download a PDF of the slides of this webinar, you can find it at that link on your screen, and that has the contact information of the presenters as well. So moving on, we have a fairly small audience today, so we have plenty of time for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, don't be shy about putting it in the question box here. So the first question we got is, what about GMO contamination in your breeding project? Are you concerned about that, or have you had any evidence of that?
That's a great question because it's really one of the foremost concerns in corn breeding for organic systems. And I think, Brian, you're probably in the best position to address that question. Do you know your isolation distance from any GMO corn that might be grown in Puerto Rico?
Well, that's the nice thing about the Lajas experiment station. There is no corn grown anywhere near here. Basically, we're surrounded by mostly hay farms and cattle farms. So there's virtually very little corn grown in Puerto Rico at all. Most of the corn that's grown is grown by winter nurseries. And there are winter nurseries with GMO corn by the Monsanto and the other biotech companies, but they're located mostly in Santa Isabel, in Isabela, in Aguadilla, and far away from here. So I wouldn't worry at all about any contamination from in Lajas. So it would just be any materials that were contaminated and brought down already contaminated could then contaminate other lines in the nursery. But since most of the pollination is done by hand, you would only be contaminating new materials if you used a contaminated pollen without knowing it. So I guess to answer the question, I basically feel there's zero possibility of GMO contamination at the Lajas experiment station, because there's no corn grown anywhere nearby.
Yeah, that's great to know, Brian. And, I wanted to point out that several of us in the group are working with a genetic system called gametophytic incompatibility, and that's one of our specific breeding targets, is to develop corn that will exclude the pollen of foreign corn, which would include GMO corn.
Okay. It was mentioned a number of times that the breeders wish to plant in late November. What breeders use the facility? Are they all public breeders or private breeders or both? Or where are they based in general? I know you mentioned some of them at the very beginning of the presentation.
Yeah, if I still have control.
Yeah, you've got control. You can go back if you want.
So on the acknowledgments down here on the bottom, I list our institutes, and our breeders are a mixture. So we have 2 universities. So New Mexico State University, Rich Pratt is there, and Cornell University, our breeder is Margaret Smith. Kevin is Do you want to describe your affiliation, Kevin, as a private consultant?
Yes, I'm a private consultant. I have a small genetic improvement program in corn, and I do consulting for genetic related concerns. But I'm not affiliated with any institution other than myself.
And then I'm a federally funded researcher. I work for the USDA Agricultural Research Service. And Walter Goldstein is from the Mondamin Institute, which is an NGO that their primary target is producing corn varieties for organic producers. So we're a diverse group, both geographically and then institutionally, and it's been good to work together. There's been some challenges, but I think overall I think everybody would say we've benefited from this collaboration.
Okay. Can you spell, Brian, the names of the cover crops that you use, please? If it's too hard to spell them out loud, you could type them into your chat box, and then I'll share them with the audience.
Okay, it's not too difficult, but I think if I can figure out how to do this, I will type it in. Okay, here it is. So Crotalaria hunsea is one, and that's the common name is sun hemp. Okay, so there's one. And then the other one that we're using is Mucuna pruriens, which the common name in English is, I have to always look at this. I just call it Mucuna.
So I just type that into the chat box. Meanwhile, maybe we'll take another question, and then I'll just pass that on when Brian types it in.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, Brian.
Well, okay, I'll just, Mucuna. Oh, what is that? Okay, well, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have any problems with mold or fungus on developing ears under bags?
Kevin, do you want to answer that?
Yes. We do have problems with mold and fungus developing on ears, and it depends on the relative humidity and the rainfall situation. So in years when we're drier than normal, as you would expect, there's relatively little ear rot, and in the years when either the planting has been delayed or there's above normal rainfall and humidity, and there's been earworm damage, any kind of injury to the ear that would provide an avenue for entry of ear rot organisms, yes, there have been specific lines, specific projects that it's been necessary to discard nearly all the ears because they were susceptible to any of a number of ear rot fungi. As an opportunistic breeder, I'd like to think that I could take advantage of that as long as I don't have to throw away everything. I can select for ear rot resistance, but it's not in a planned or a directed sort of way. If we're using the nursery to generate hybrid seed, it means that we may lose all the seed of a particular hybrid that we've generated. But ear rot is probably the most serious harvest concern that we have in this kind of a situation.
So Kevin, in general, would you say it's more serious than in your nursery in Illinois, or less serious? How does it compare to, our summer nursery?
For me, it's been more serious. And I think it's because the materials that I send to my Puerto Rico winter nursery are full season. They tend to carry a lot of moisture late in the year, late into the growing season. And the relative humidity is high enough. It's that humidity difference that puts them in conditions that's more likely for ear rot to develop. I think that Walter and Margaret's nurseries have probably been slightly less affected than mine because their materials are earlier and they tend to dry out much better, and so they've escaped in a manner because their grain moisture is low enough that they're not extended in that circumstances where ear rot can be a problem.
So that would be the Ithaca, New York, and Wisconsin locations, the northern locations.
Yes.
Okay, we have a greeting from Costa Rica, Central America. So exciting to have you on. Thank you. And let's see, we have someone who's wondering whether you are looking to expand the number of breeders and rows you grow each winter, and so whether it would be possible to send you seeds for this winter.
I think that's a question for Brian.
Well, okay, we do have other winter nurseries that we're participating with a group in South Dakota that we're doing a winter nursery in organic cowpeas. So we do. I mean, I don't know whether the question was whether they can send corn seeds to include in this nursery, or whether they are interested in having their own nursery here, but basically, there is a possibility for us to have other winter nurseries, organic winter nurseries, of corn or other crops, but they would need to communicate with me at my email that is on the first slide, and then we can talk about the details.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's see, here's a question about fall armyworm. What do you attribute good fall armyworm to as conventional winter nurseries spray more with more toxic sprays?
Okay, well, okay, I'll just talk about my own experience. Okay, one year, okay, well, anyway, I mean, I'm going to tell a little story about a variety that we have here in Puerto Rico called SureSweet. And one year I had that planted on the organic plot. We sprayed just once with BT, and the plants were totally clean. At that year, which was the only year that this happened, and that was not during the time that we had the winter nursery, this Orei winter nursery, but there was a GMO planting at another part of the station that they were looking at drought resistance, but I assume that those plants probably had the BT gene also. And those plants, and they were spraying them weekly with chemical cocktails, and those plants were loaded with fall armyworm. So that's just a little story, but but getting back to these non-adapted varieties, that was just I guess what I have to assume is that the trilogy and the Pyganic and the BT are killing the young armyworms. That's, to me, that's the only explanation, that the products that we're using are being effective in controlling the armyworms. I don't know if Kevin has something else to add to that.
Yes, I do. Not to contradict you, but to add, the transgenes that have been used to control insects were primarily selected for their effectiveness against insects like European corn borer. And so even though they're being used to control things like fall armyworm and corn earworm, that wasn't how they were designed to work. They were used as an afterthought. So that's number one. Number two, in the parts of the island where winter nurseries are grown extensively throughout the year, they're spraying fairly routinely 2 or almost 3 times a week, and they're spraying so routinely that I think that the selection pressure for the insects to develop resistance to those sprays is quite strong. And so even though they have genes for insect control and they've been spraying, the insects have changed as a result of that system, and the sprays aren't working, and the corn isn't controlling the insects. we have relatively less damage in our nurseries at Lajas for two reasons, at least two reasons. One, the number of species that act as alternate hosts for fall armyworm and corn earworm is above 150. And the Lajas farm in particular has many of those species growing on it, and so there's things for fall armyworm and corn earworm to eat without them having to go to corn, which is different than it is elsewhere on the island where corn is grown extensively in winter nurseries. And then the second thing is that because we're not manipulating the insects with sprays in the same way throughout the year, only for part of the year, and then only for a very small field, the net effect on the insect population is minimal. We're not selecting for resistance to these sprays. And then the other item is that the fall armyworm resistance that we've been able to identify is so effective that those materials will survive the entire growing season without any spray whatsoever. They are effective in controlling fall armyworm and corn earworm. And so the lines that came out of our selection program are so good for fall armyworm that they don't need any assistance from sprays at the moment.
Okay. Great. So let's see. What about resistance to rootworm? What is observed for this?
I really don't know that we have rootworm here, do we, Kevin?
I've never seen, well, there are beetles that have a superficial resemblance to the beetles that are rootworms. But I don't know specifically that western or northern corn rootworms occur in Puerto Rico. And so in the absence of having any data about the occurrence of those insects in Puerto Rico, I think it would be inappropriate to make any comments about rootworm tolerance or any progress that we've made.
But we definitely haven't noticed any. I haven't noticed any symptoms. I don't know what happens with rootworm attack, but whether the plants fall over or whether they die, or I don't know what happens. But we don't seem to have any problems with the roots.
Well, at least not from rootworm feeding anyway.
Right. But I mean, I've never seen the plants fall over or they're not easy to pull up because the roots are rotten or anything. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question about what seed quality is like relative to conventional winter nurseries.
Did you say seed quality?
Yeah, seed quality.
So like a percentage germination kind of measurement?
If the questioner wants to clarify, feel free to type in clarification there.
I don't recall that we've tested it, but I think one year we did test it, and it was not markedly different than the seed that we produce in our summer nursery.
Okay, yeah, he's talking about mold, insect damage, germination, viability.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess when I say seed quality, I'm referring only to the ability to germinate, and it's been so nearly what we normally see in our normal seed lots that we haven't tested it extensively. So I would say by eye, it's approximately equivalent, but that would be not considering the seed that is heavily infected with fungus, that we would discard. And so we talked about the problems we've had with ear rot and fungal contamination. It is definitely an issue for us. Do you want to say anything more about that, Kevin?
I'd agree with you. As long as we're discarding the things that have obvious ear rot infection, for the most part, in my nursery anyway, the germination and the broader definition of seed quality is remarkably similar to coming out of more conventional nurseries.
Okay.
But it requires that culling of the ear rot.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. The farmer in Puerto Rico, I'm so sorry, Costa Rica, who is with us, said that they have to plant about 6 acres of corn organically, and it's a mixed heirloom variety with local hybrids of Costa Rica, and they know that the seed was taken from conventional low-input corn. Do you have any advice on organic fertility management in order to have good yields?
I don't know, Kevin. Do you want to answer that? I mean, I can share what we have done. We've, tried to have a good cover crop before the corn crop, which is turned under as a green manure. We assume with a good cover crop that we're getting about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and then we add an additional 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre with a commercial granular organic fertilizer, which is what is available here as BioFlora 665. I don't know if Kevin wants to add anything to that. Kevin?
I don't have anything specific to suggest.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thanks. And I guess we've got one last question. Oh, wait, no, we've got one more here. Let's see here. If you grow corn in the Midwest, harvest and send it to your farm and produce it organically, can it then be considered organically produced seeds, or does it require 2 seasons of organic to be considered organically produced seeds?
Now, seeds that are produced on an organic, a certified organic farm are organic. They can, on a certified organic farm, you can plant seeds that are not organic as long as they're untreated, and you can't find that variety anywhere else, like organic. And if you cannot find a variety that's organic, you're allowed to plant untreated seeds. You just have to document that they're untreated, and then the seeds you harvest from those non-organic seeds, which were grown organically, will be organic.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty much it for the questions here. So I'd like to thank everyone I guess somebody wants to know how far the farm is from Mayaguez and wonders if there's a nice beach there. So you can answer that before we end there.
Yeah, we have beaches, nice beaches everywhere on the island. So it's only 35 by 100 miles. So anywhere you go, you're within a half an hour of a nice beach. It's about 30 minutes from Mayaguez.
Well, that sounds really nice from here in Oregon right now. So, well, we are running out of time. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. And I just wanted to say once again that you can find our many other upcoming and archived webinars on organic farming and research topics at the link on your screen. And we'd also very much appreciate it if you could fill out the follow-up survey that you'll be receiving in an email later today. So thank you so much, Paul, Brian, and Kevin for presenting this webinar. And thanks to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Alice.
You're welcome.
Thank you.